Okay, so the last 2 days we had dealt with what Lashon Hara has to do with macha'ah. I will quickly summarize it, but today we're actually shifting to the Lashon Hara thing, so if for whatever reason you weren't here, you can catch up on share later. But to quickly summarize it, the Gemara had said maybe the position who says that macha'ah needs to be in front of 3 is going according to the Shita that Lashon Hara, it's not Lashon Hara if it's in front of 3. And what we tried to do is, the last 2 days, is what in the name of God does one have to do with the other? So, the first thing we did was we cleared our minds and said we know nothing about Lashon Hara. And said the first thing you might realize is it could be that this teaches you that Lashon Hara is not about gossip. It's not what the Rambam thinks Lashon Hara is, it's something else. So, for example, Rabbi Chai Gaon and the Ritva, at least in this sugya, thinks is what it means, says that Lishna Bisha Lashon Hara does not mean gossip, it means breach of confidentiality. Based on the sugya in Yom Daf Daled, it says that if someone tells you a secret, you cannot publicize it until they tell you this is not secret. And the logic, according to the Ritva, let's say, goes as follows. If Yaakov tells a secret to me and to Ezra, so then it's presumed confidential, we're not allowed to spread it. But if he says it in front of the whole shir, so then clearly it was never meant to be confidential, even though he didn't say this is not a secret. It's clear from context it's not a secret because he said it publicly. The magic number at which we assume that he's not intending to say something confident is 3, because 3 is considered public. In that sense, it parallels macha'ah, because if you say it in front of 2, it's still in the realm of confidentiality, so it's not clear that it's meant to get from Andrew to Rami, and therefore it's not a good macha'ah. If it's in front of 3, then we learn from the sugya of confidentiality that something is considered public after 3, and that's the connection between the sugya. There was also the position of the Urayan, who said that in the Gemara in Erechim, 3 statements are linked. 1 is that something is not Lashon Hara if you say it to somebody's face. 2, something's not Lashon Hara if you're not afraid to turn around and find that the person you're talking about happens to be behind you. Statement 3 is that something's not Lashon Hara in front of 3. From this, the Uraim derived that Lashon Hara is not bad-mouthing someone, it's only being hypocritical and bad-mouthing them in such a way that it won't get back to them. But if you're willing to say it to somebody's face, so it might be on dvarim, the isser to hurt people emotionally, but it's not Lashon Hara. And therefore, what's the parallel to macha'ah? Again, the reason you need 3 is to make it public enough that it is sure to get back to the person you're speaking about. The same phenomenon taps into Lashon Hara. Both of these shitot assume that macha'ah itself is not Lashon Hara. However, those that read quotes the Rashbam, and in the Rashbam it seems to be more the shita of his rebellion than his own shita, which is that no, macha'ah is actually Lashon Hara. What makes it not Lashon Hara? So, there's a rule that if you do it publicly, then it's not Lashon Hara, for whatever reason he doesn't explain. And therefore, if you do macha'ah in front of 3, it's no longer Lashon Hara, and therefore it's macha'ah. If it's less than 3, then it is Lashon Hara, and it is not going to work. It could be that he holds like the Uraim, that his Rebbe holds like the Uraim, right, or something like that, unclear.
But goes around and hold that even if it's public knowledge, it's still considered Lashon Hara.
So that's what we're going to talk about today, right? And then there was the shita of Rabbeinu Yonah who says no. It's very. Then this is what Eli had basically said, which is no. Following Tosfot's position that the Gemara in Erechim had said, what is the classic case of Lashon Hara? When you say there's a fire in somebody's house. Now, why is that the classic Lashon Hara? So, according to Tosfot, it is not. According to Tosfot, saying something publicly or privately is Lashon Hara equally. There's only one case in which saying something publicly makes it not Lashon Hara, and that is something which is ambiguous. Because when I say there's always a fire going in his house, I could mean because Rami is in such a good host that he always has guests coming, so there's always a fire going. Or I could mean Rami is a glutton, right, and therefore he's constantly eating. Or he's mifunak, and he doesn't like yeshiva food, and he insists on cooking his own food because he's just stuck up, and, right? So how can you determine whether it's negative or positive? Because it says it's very simple. If I say it in public, that means I don't mind that it's going to get back to Rami. I probably meant it neutrally. If I'm going to hide, that indicates that it was probably negative. So Rabbeinu Yonah follows a similar model, and he says, look, there's another time when something could or could not be Lashon Hara, and it's not only whether it's meant as neutral or negative. It could be totally negative. But the question is, am I saying it in order to gossip, or am I saying it as constructive criticism? So, if I hide it from him, then clearly I'm just doing it because I want to badmouth him. But if I do it in a way that's going to get back to him, so then it's constructive criticism. Now, Rabbeinu Yonah has two formulations of this. One is that...
Not to directly to the person.
What?
Constructive.
Well, that's exactly the point. Meaning, so what he says is that it could be that, look, if I'm saying it publicly, that means that I wanted to get back to him, and I want the social pressure to build, and I want that social pressure to help him change, right? And that's considered permitted.
Could you use that, give post-criticism to them saying, this is what you should be doing, what he did?
Yeah, exactly, right? But according to Rabbeinu Yonah, if I do it publicly, that shows that I actually care about harnessing social forces to teach people what not to do, to teach Rami what he should be doing, right, etc. But if I did that privately, I'm clearly just gossiping because I'm not getting any of those goals.
Yeah.
So he has two formulations. He says, therefore, if I say it privately, either it's a problem, not necessarily because it's Lashon Hara, it could be that I really did mean it constructively, right? But it looks wrong because I didn't say it publicly, right? Or in his second formulation, it's more important. It's if you anonymously source criticism, no one believes it. If no one believes it, it's not effective, right? If you put your name on the line, you have skin in the game, then it's effective because people believe you when you put your name out there, and it'll be effective. But if it's not effective, it was pointless, right? So that's Rabbeinu Yonah's two formulations. In both of those formulations, the logic, macha, is very close to being Lashon Hara. It's not actually, but it's the same idea, which is, if I say it privately, what am I accomplishing? But if I say it publicly, that means people are going to tell Rami, and people are going to criticize him, and he's going to hold on to his star. So just like by Lashon Hara, it makes it constructive. Is the publicity, what makes macha effective, is the publicity. Right? Fine. So that's where we left off in terms of macha. But then we transitioned at the end of the shir and said, okay, well now, what does this teach us about the primary sugya of Lashon Hara? Not the macha sugya, but Lashon Hara. So, again, according to the Ritva, we have no idea. According to Rav Chai, we have no idea. Because the Lashon Hara being mentioned here is breach of confidentiality. We don't know whether, but presumably gossip is usher, publicly, privately, doesn't matter. According to the Uraim, Lashon Hara doesn't forbid me from gossiping ever, unless I'm being hypocritical. But if you think that Lashon Hara is what we normally think of as Lashon Hara, what the Rambam thinks is Lashon Hara is talking badly at somebody else, so then what does this teach us about Lashon Hara? So, seemingly, according to the Rashbam's Rebbeim, if I say Lashon Hara in front of three, it's automatically mutter. Why would that be? No idea, right? But seemingly, that's automatically the case. According to the Rambam is a different position, which doesn't seem to work in our sugya, or maybe it does, but I don't know how he gets there, right? Which is that the heter goes like this. If you say Lashon Hara in front of three, if Lashon Hara was already said in front of three, okay, let's rewind. When the Gemara says anything said in front of three is not Lashon Hara, you can mean it in one of two ways. One is, if it was originally said in front of three people, it's not Lashon Hara, or if you say it in front of three people, it's not Lashon Hara, right? The Uraim says, if I say it in front of Lashon Hara, it's automatically not Lashon Hara because it's not hypocritical. According to the Rambam, no. It's if it was said in front of three people, it's already public, and therefore I can spread it further, I can repeat it because I'm not doing anything. But the Rambam puts a huge qualification on it. Because the Rambam says, no, it's not true. There's only one very specific case in which it's mutter, and that is if by repeating the information, it doesn't spread it farther, so then it's not Lashon Hara. So if it was said in front of the whole yeshiva, so if I repeat it within the yeshiva, it's permitted. Right? Exactly. Right? So the Rambam just says, the only thing that this rule teaches us is that if something is already public, then it's permitted to spread it. But the Rambam qualifies it by saying, right, you could have said, look, as long as it's public at all, so now it's mutter for you to spread it to the whole world. Because once it's public and it's going to get out anyways. The Rambam says no. If it's public, you can spread it, but only within the circles who already know about it. But it's never mutter to extend gossip beyond where it is already known. Right? That's how the Rambam reads the sugya. So what I want to do today is wrap up the halacha l'maisa on Lashon Hara and bring it to modern psak. Okay? So, first thing I want to do is take you to the Chavetz Chaim. So, Rami, why don't you tell me the very insightful comment you said about the Chavetz Chaim, because I think you are 1,000% right.
Chavetz Chaim really doesn't like this.
Very good. Thank you, Rami. So, here's the interesting thing, is that if, before the Chavetz Chaim, if I asked you, is there any heter to speak Lashon Hara once it's been said in front of 3 people, I would say, yeah, plausibly, right? The Chavetz Chaim, who is like, his number one belief in life is that gossip, right? Lashon Hara, according to the Rambam, is like the worst thing that has ever happened. The notion that there should be a heter, that you are allowed to ever speak Lashon Hara, is crazy. So what does the Chavetz Chaim do? He basically collects as many chumrot as he possibly can, based on all the shit that we've just seen, and comes up with a super, super, super machmir position. So what does he say? As follows. One second. So he knows, right, that there is this theoretical heter. Oh my God, so many pages, right? He says, Yesh Omrim, some say that if someone had already gossiped about someone b'fnei shlosha in front of 3, even though the original person violated Lashon Hara, right? This is unlike the Aragon. This is like, right, the Rambam. If one of these 3 people now spread it further, lo avar bazal isur Lashon Hara. So some say once it's public, and there's no Lashon Hara. The chavrei itlay. Uvedavar ha'asur litkalot lo asar Torah mishum Lashon Hara. Okay? So he admits that someone once said such a thing. But now look what he does to it. Yes, someone. He says, V'davka l'saper b'derech akrai. 1, this is only if you happen to say it, sort of off the cuff. Avaloshi yitkavein laha'avir hakol galot yoter. But not if you intend to spread it farther. So the first chumrah is the Rambam. Afilu im lo yisaper b'shem yishisiper lo. Even if you're not going to say who told you. Rag yisaper stam shekach lekach nishma ploni. Right? Even if you say, this is what I heard, even if you qualify it and say it's just a rumor, won't help you. Right? So that's qualification too. It doesn't help you to say this is what I heard. Right? Even though you're qualifying it, too bad. And then he adds, Va'afilu ma shehitarnu. Bim eno mitkavein legalot. Davka shomer rishon shishama ba'atzmo la'teravon siper al Shimon ba'pei plata. Says this heter is limited to the first person who heard it, but not secondhand information. Avo mishu shemami menu asar lelech achar kach al smach hazeh shamar lo misaper lo shishama davar zeh ba'pei plata. Right? The correct qualification is no, because then it's hearsay. So this is only for things that you know, but not if it's secondhand hearsay.
Then only spreading fake news.
Yeah. Now where does he get that head there? That is, sir, unclear. I mean, he tells you where he gets it, but it's very unclear in our sugya. Right? Right, and then he says, right, all types of qualifications that you have to know that it was true. And then he adds yet another qualification. If you don't know whether the first person who said it, it's now public, but you don't know whether the first person who said the Lashon Hara said in front of 3, it's usher to spread. Why? Because since the original person didn't say it in front of 3, so now, even though it's public, right, you can't spread it. And then he adds another qualification. This is a crazy one. If one of the 3 people who was originally said in front of it had any yirat shamayim, and therefore is not the type of person to say Lashon Hara, so then you can't spread it. Why? Because the heter only comes when it was said in front of 3 people, all 3 of whom are assumed to be gossipers, and therefore it can be assumed to be public. But even if one of them has self-control, so Memela it wasn't public. Now, what's the problem? Is that clearly, if you try to carry this over to Macha'a, right? Like really, would the Rambam, would the Chafetz Chaim say if Macha'a was said in front of one person who's God-fearing? I mean, like, so obviously say, oh, maybe Macha'a is different, but this does not flow naturally from our sugya. And then he says, not only that, if one of the original 3 people was a relative of the person that the gossip is about, since he's less likely to spread the information, it's not public. So the heter doesn't apply. Furthermore,
what relatives does he have? Because
yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, exactly. My relatives are the most likely to spread. Yeah, fine. Rami's like, if it was my siblings, they definitely would be gossiping about me. He says, and definitely if it's that uncle that we all gossip about, you know. Fine. Then he says, ordinarily, the dafko da'ir, and it's only mutter in that city. Avalo b'iracheret. But not in other cities, even if there's travel between them, because it's still less likely that it would get from one to the other. And then he adds another one, and this is, I mean, Chafetz Chaim was a tzaddik and never gossiped, so fine. The next halacha can only be said by such a person, which is, and if Omer is here, shalom l'galato, if the person who said the gossip said, don't spread this farther, so then it clearly is not considered public, and therefore you can't spread it more. Now, I mean, this is crazy. Meaning, the whole point of our Gemara is that once you say something publicly, right, as we all know, the best way to make sure that everybody knows about something is to say, shh, it's a secret, right? We all know this, right? I'm reading Nathan Taleb's Anti-Fragile right now, and he has a nice description of this, right? He's like, gossip and secrets, right, are anti-fragile. Right? What's anti-fragile? Right? So he says there's fragile, there's robust, and there's anti-fragile. Right? Anti-fragile are things that get stronger the more you try to break them. Right? Right? Not right. It's not right. He argues that the opposite of fragile is not resilient. Right? But it's anti-fragile. Right? It's like muscles. Right? Right? You work them to fatigue. Right? The muscle breaks, and as long as you have enough protein, they grow back stronger. Right? That's not resilient, that's anti-fragile. Right? They grow based on stressors. Right? So in that, he has, right, 2 of his examples are secrets, right? Where the best way to make sure that something does not remain a secret is to try to, right, is to try to keep it confidential. If you just say information, it might spread, it might not. But if you say, shh, it's a secret, right? Exactly, right? His other example, right, is, right, related to that point is putting something in cherem. He doesn't use that word, right? But trying to ban a book, right, is the best way to sell it, right? Right? That's like, in the Jewish world, the classic example was making of a gadol, right? Yeah, you only love it because it's put in cherem. It's like a terrible, like, it's a weird book. It's like, nobody read it before it was put in cherem.
So what is that book?
It's a book written about it's like a book about, what is it, Yaakov Kamenetsky, whatever, right? And like, it's sort of eclectic and has like some weird stories and whatever, and like, no one really read it. And then someone put it in cherem because it had heretical things like, Rav Aaron Kotler read the newspaper, or someone read the newspaper and someone wrote love letters to their wife. Their wife, I mean, totally controversial, right? Like, there's nothing in there that's like even mild, who cares? But it was put in cherem because Gedolim don't write, love letters to their spouse, and they don't read newspapers. Then it became a bestseller. It's like, please, you went to Rice Lifkin's museum this week. The reason everybody knows Rice Lifkin is because he put in cherem, right? Before that, nobody knew him. It was like a few people knew that there was a rabbi who liked animals and wrote about animals, and he was the zoo rabbi. He was put in the cherem by Shlomo Miller and whatever. He's a bestseller. He has a museum, he has books, he has a website. Because gossip is anti-fragile. The more you try to quash it, right? But the Chavetz Chaim says, no. When I spread the information, I said, make sure not to spread it. It's us to spread it because clearly we're all going to listen. This is like, to me, an unbelievable. I mean, it shows you how much of a tzaddik he was. That's all I can say. But it's totally unrealistic. I'm sorry. And then he says, and then he says that even if I know for a fact that one or two of the people in the crowd didn't listen to me and spread the information, it's still usher for me to spread, because ba'apei klasa means in front of three people who all spread the information. Okay. 1 second.
If you were to go deliver matzah from the Shabbat time and like go this relative, would that be
What?
If you were to deliver matzah from the Shabbat time,
it would not work. 100%. If you were mocha in front of the Chavetz Chaim, Rami could keep his land forever. Right? I mean, that's the feeling you get by the end of this thing. I'll be honest, right? I mean, I mean, right, you read it, and then he says, and obviously you can't add a word, and right? And if it was something that was known in the past, but now people don't know about it, you can't do it. Right? And then he adds, and by the way, even once we've whittled down this heter to basically non-existent, it only applies to the person saying it. But anyone who hears it isn't allowed to believe the information. So by the time you read all these qualifications, as Rami said, the only conclusion you get to is that the Chavetz Chaim was convinced that gossip is wrong, and he had to then prove it from the sugya, even though this is a very weird read of the sugya. So how did he get here? Right? How did he get to this? So this is why when people think the Chavetz Chaim, right, is just like a hashkafic work, I mean, there's a lot of hashkafa involved. But no, he actually gets, right, he has to go through a lot of halachic argumentation to get here. So how does he do it? So what he does is he says, look, there are, right, he basically combines all the chumrah. And he says, look, Tosef says that the only heter of apei klasa is by ambiguous information, right? Which means that if it's actually negative, there's no heter to say it, even if it's public, etc. Right? That's Tosef. And then he says there is he goes on forever here, right? And then he says, right, there's the Rambam's position, right, that even when it is mutter, it's only mutter if you're not going to spread it farther, right? And then there's Rabbeinu Yonah's position that it's only in a case where it's like constructive, criticism and things like that, right? And basically what he does is he says, and then he also goes to the Rashbam's position, right? And he basically compiles all these, takes the chumras from all of them, right? Adds a few of his own, right? Mixes it all together, right? And you get the Chavetz Chaim, right? But if you read this, you'll see, right? It goes on. If you want to look at the analysis of our sugya, right? It goes from, just look at the footnotes. I won't kill you with it, but the footnotes go, it's all this small print. You understand, right? And obviously, why is this, I think, the longest footnote in the entire Sefer Chavetz Chaim? Because it's the one that most threatens his worldview, right? Because there seems to be this glaring heter, right, of it. Yeah, right, and you see that at the end, right, basically he says, I've explained the sugya according to the Rashbam, according to Tosfot, according to the Rambam, and now according to Rabbeinu Yonah, right, and he goes through it, and he, right, and he brings the chumrot essentially of all of them. Okay, so again, if you want to see a full treatment, enjoy. He also then tries to say, maybe, what does Rashi understand? Okay. But let me talk a little halacha, because I mentioned right before, 2-3 years ago now already, I wrote a series on halacha in the age of social media. So I wrote about apei tlata. It took me 5 articles to really get through it, right? But so let me add some halacha to it as follows. Right, okay. Now the Chafetz Chaim, I'll just note, the way he understands the Rashbam, I'll read you my summary of how he understands the Rashbam. I'm not totally convinced, but let's see it, right? The Rashbam is understood by Chafetz Chaim, understands the dispensation offered in this Gemara is for what the Rambam understands as rechilut. Namely, if A speaks about B publicly, then C may inform B of this. While this is normally rechilut, when A knows that it might get back to B, it's permitted. Right? That's the only case of the Rashbam, according to Chafetz Chaim, thinks it's mutter. Rechilut, as understood here, is somewhere between a breach of confidence and gossip. Thus, the Rashbam seems to be assuming that if the speaker does not care that the fact that he or she has gossip be kept private, the listener may share the information, even though it may harm the relationship between A and B. Okay? Right? That's essentially the way he understands the Rashbam, and that's how he deals with the Rashbam's position. Fine. And here I'll read you my summary of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim combines many of these sentiments to issue a very strict ruling. First, as mentioned above, he notes that forbidden Lashon Hara said in public is surely worse than that said in private. For the most part, he accepts the stringent view of Tosfot and Rabbeinu Yonah, limiting the dispensation to cases where the information is not clearly negative, and the very act of saying it publicly indicates the speaker has positive intent. Then he accepts the added limitation of the Rambam, namely that even in cases where the information might be public, it can never be permitted to intentionally spread it further. Though, as we have noted, his position is less clear regarding information that is universally known. I'll come back to that in a minute. He further notes that even these dispensations might apply only when the 3 people who hear the information are not righteous, but if they are or otherwise motivated to not share the information, perhaps because they are friends or relatives of the subject, the information cannot be presumed to be known, and thus it cannot be spread according to anyone. The 3 people must also hear the gossip at the same time. He also suggests that even when gossip is public in a given place, no assumption can be made about other cities. There, one must assume the information is not known unless one finds out otherwise. Furthermore, he notes that even in cases in which it is permitted to share Lashon Hara, this does not necessarily imply that the listeners may believe the information. They must do their due diligence and investigate what is being said. Skipping down, even if all these conditions are met, the Chafetz Chaim notes that this is at most would allow one to share the information exactly as it was stated. However, to add or spin the information would be a qualitative addition and be prohibited. Furthermore, if the speaker knows the listener will spin it or exaggerate it, the speaker must not share it. Fine. Now, there is a category, however, that is more complicated, and it goes like this. And it gets down to the question of why is it mutter, right? According to the Shita, there is some sort of head there to spread information that has already been said about apei tlata. Why is that true? So Rav Zalman Goldberg has a complicated argument, which goes as follows. When information is conveyed in front of 1 or 2 people, those people will keep it secret. They do not want the original speaker to know that they are responsible for sharing the information. However, once information is shared in front of 3 people, the potential guilt can always be deflected. Once that is the case, it is inevitable that information will not remain private. Thus, the original speaker will give up, even if unwittingly, on privacy being maintained.
Okay, so he doesn't care, that's what you're saying.
Right? This is where Rav Zalman says. Rav Zalman's argument, and it's based on a sugya in Bava Metzia Vav, which says as follows: that if someone saw a coin fall in front of 1 or 2 people, you have to return it, because if a coin falls in front of 1 or 2 people, the owner assumes that he'll get it back. But once it falls in front of 3, since everyone can lie and steal it, the owner gives up on the hope of ever getting back. Memela, it's not stealing. right? This is Rizal Nehemiah's argument. A more straightforward formulation, and I will quote myself, okay? A more straightforward formulation is to say that once information is public, it is public. That's my way of reading the sugya. As Meiri writes, once the information has been divulged in front of 3 people, it is as if he said it in front of the entire world. And therefore, it is pointless, right? It's just pointless. Why? And the way I formulate it here based on Chavetz Chaim is as follows. What is the word that the Torah uses for Lashon Hara? Rechilut, right? A peddler of information. The logic seems to go as follows. It's only Lashon Hara if they need you to give them the information, because then the metaphor works. But once it's public, they don't need you, right? It can't be Lashon Hara if you are not really the one peddling the information because it's already out there, right? It's like selling air, right? Oh, okay. Now, obviously, the Rambam, my guess is the Rambam took the argument basically as I said it, and therefore, but then took an implication from it, which is, that's only if that is actually true. But if it's not true, because they do need you, because you're spreading it further, so then it's usher. But if that's the case, then there is a situation the Rambam doesn't deal with, but is very relevant halacha l'maisa, and that is, practically there's a difference between something which is somewhat known, because it was said in front of a bunch of people, and something which is universally known, right? And therefore, several poskim take this. So Rav Ariel has an article on called Lashon Hara B'tzibur Demokrati, who argues as follows. In a democratic public. That's the name of the article. Lashon Hara B'tzibur Demokrati. That's the article. And he makes the argument as follows. The Rambam's limitation only applies b'apei plata. Why? Because saying something in front of 3, the reason it's mutter to continue spreading the information is because you assume it will eventually get out. But therefore, if you're spreading it farther, so then it's usher because it wasn't going to get to those people. But if something is a higher madrega of publicity, meaning it's not just that it's said in front of a bunch of people who will probably get out, but it is already public, so then it's universally known and you're literally doing nothing by continuing to spread it. Lamai nafkamina in modern psak, are you allowed to talk about the news when it's critical of someone? According to the Rambam, so if you take the Rambam strictly, you might think, well, if Andrew hasn't read the news yet, I can't talk about the news with him.
What news?
No, the news, like literally the news. Like, Watergate. Am I allowed, Naniach, we lived 40, right, in the time of Watergate. Am I allowed to tell Andrew, did you hear about the Watergate scandal? Right? So according to Rambam, the answer might be no, because Andrew hasn't read the news yet.
It's not full yet.
Correct. But Rav Ariel says no. Even the Rambam will be moded that there's a difference between something that was said in front of a bunch of people. Because, like, sure, it might be common information in Migdal. That doesn't mean that I'm allowed to spread it outside of it. I'm not allowed to put it on Facebook, right? But if something is in the news, so I don't tell. Welcome, Rory Grossman. Hi. You're in the right place. I'm Jonathan Ziring. Okay. I know Red Shade said that his father is coming to talk to you around 11:30. He's usually a few minutes late. So I assume he'll come in there. So go in there. I don't. If you want. If you go up the stairs, Shmuel David is giving shir, so he might know his father's schedule better. Okay. So because his classroom is up the stairs, so you can ask him. You haven't seen Ruchaim Ozer. He didn't like coming on the side. No. Okay, so you might want to just ask Shmuel David. So just go straight up the stairs right here, and there's a classroom as soon as you come there, and Shmuel David is giving shir there. You can ask him when his father is coming, and then we'll start at 12ish. Okay. Great. So Azrael Ariel says, look, maybe all the limitations that we find Ba'apei Plata are only true of things that are public but not universally known. Because then it makes sense to talk about what the Rambam says. It's mutter to spread but not spread farther. But if we lived in the time of Watergate, you were going to find out about it within a day or two, right? Meaning, like the example I get, you may not like that President Trump would insult people on his Twitter account. But once it was in his Twitter account, the fact that you now said, did you hear what he said about, who cares? I mean, at this point, it is what it is, right? Like, it is what it is, right? And therefore, Rav Aviner also argues that when something is universally known, it's not usher. The big nafkamina of halacha-l'maisa is, as I said, if something's in the news already, or something was posted on social media, right? And even the Rambam might be moda that it's not Lashon Hara anymore. Now, he notes, so Rav Avram Shapira, though, has a qualification. He says, maybe or maybe not. Rav Avram Shapira says, maybe even in this shita, that's only true while it's in the news cycle. But once it's out of the news cycle, maybe people will know it in the back of their minds, but you are accomplishing something by bringing it up again.
Also reminding something.
Correct. Right? Again, I don't know if this is true, but this is Rav Avram Shapira's argument. Is like, right? What's his argument? He says, look. Oh, someone was to tell Rucham, was it? Oh, they did it? They connected? Okay, good. Fine. If they don't connect, then make sure they connect. And what's his argument? His argument actually makes a lot of sense, which is, right, I was reading a book a while ago, which said, right, what's the best way to make sure that no one finds out about something nowadays? Right? It's not by hiding it. It's by over-inundating them with information.
Oh,
right? So, for example, right, Enron, right, the Enron scandals, right, it turns out, remember, you're probably too young, but this was like the beginning of like the collapses of big companies because of, right, like in 2008. Enron was like the classic one. But it turns out that Enron, right, none of the information, they people were accusing them of hiding information. It turns out they didn't. It's just that they published everything in excruciating legal detail, so nobody bothered reading it or understood it, right? Exactly. So Rav Avram Shapira says, look, nowadays people are so over-inundated with information, the best way to make sure that a story doesn't hurt you is to just wait a few weeks when people are over-inundated with other things. They may still know about it, but it's not the scandal of the week anymore, right? Right? It's like, do any of you watch John Oliver?
On occasion.
Last week tonight? No? Really? Older? Oh, anyways. Well, he he hated Trump. But every week, this is basically how he started. He's like, in a normal presidency, right? This would have been the story of the week, but he only has to show once a week. He's like, however, since the story I was going to talk about from last Sunday, right, there's another 23 different scandals that have happened, right? Meaning, at some point, you're over-inundated with things. So Rav Avram Shapira says, bringing up an old scandal actually is meaningful. Because even if people know it in the back of their mind, so much happens, we get so much information. So, Rav Dov Lior has a different qualification. He says, since Chazal say that after 12 months, people forget things, right? That's why we say Zachar once a year, right? So constantly remember, it's based on that assumption that after 12 months, people forget things. So Rav Dov Lior says, maybe it's only mutter within 12 months. But after 12 months, people forget things, and therefore, you're actually accomplishing something by bringing up a scandal. I would argue that that's true of some things, but even though Watergate is way before either of our times, we still know what it is. It's like, so not everything falls out of the news cycle. And I would add that maybe even sometimes it's not the right thing to do, even if it's technically mutter, but ein malachaso. But what this tells you, right, that these halachot are really important, because if we don't take all the kind of qualifications, it turns out that once things are on social media or whatever, it really might not be usher anymore to spread it, right? Now, if you want, you can go through my articles where I really go through different things where, I think we could really qualify a lot of these. So, for example, if something's on social media, I tend to think that it's probably, at this point, mutter, if not always the nicest thing, to continue spreading it, at least while it's still in the news cycle, right, as it were. But if something is in a closed Facebook group, yesh ladun, right? Because clearly you're spreading it farther. It may be that practically, even if, it's a friends-only thing, but you say if you have 1,000 friends, or if I post something on Facebook, right, even if I post friends only, so is it really going to stay private? Probably not. But on the other hand, it could be that the fact that I try to limit it means that by you spreading it, you are, right? We really have to hammer it out because in the modern world of mass media and social media, right, information really is universally public in ways that might make it that me talking about it is meaningless from this, right? Now, I will note, this is something that I do think is definitely true. Shlomo Rosner in his Alei Be'er makes the point on Chavetz Chaim, and I think he's definitely right, is that he makes the following diuk. He says the heter ba'pei tlata is only in front of 3 people, but not among 3 people. Now you're going to tell me, wow, you're splitting hairs, right? He says, no. I'm not splitting hairs. There's a difference between among and in front of. What's the difference? Very simple. If I have a staff meeting, right, with let's say 6 of us, right, and we share sensitive information about one of you, because we have to, about a medical condition, because of whatever, right, which we're, whatever, with all the waivers that you signed, or whatever we're allowed to talk about, okay? I think we would all legitimately have a taina if we just said, well, we talked about it in our staff meeting of 6, so therefore I can post your medical problems on the yeshiva website, right? Right? Or, right, we all understand. Or, if, we have a family therapy session, right? So there are 7 people in my family, right? So does that mean if we go to a therapist as a family, now the therapist can say, hey, the information was said in front of more than 3 people. There's no client confidentiality. No, that's crazy, right? So he makes this very sharp deal that he thinks that ba'apei tlata is only mutter in front of 3 people. What does that mean? Meaning, I say information to 3 people. I'm spreading it. But if we say it among 3 people, meaning there's a presumption that this is amongst a group because, we're all in therapy together, right? Or whatever. There's no presumption of publicity there, right? We're a group, right? We're a group, and we're saying it among ourselves. In that case, just because there's more than 3 people in the group doesn't create a presumption of publicity, right? I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Or whatever, a doctor shares sensitive information about the patient with all the other doctors who are involved in the surgery and all the nurses, right? That doesn't mean that everyone wants, the world to know your heart problems, your whatever, right? I think that's definitely, right, that's definitely an important qualification here. Now, I do think that the following is the case. Here, I'm going to summarize, right? So, as we noted, Lashon Hara might mean confidentiality and it might mean gossip, and ba'apei tlata is brought up in both. This is my summary of how the halacha plays out, okay? What emerges from these positions, especially those of Tosfos, Erech, and Rabbeinu Yonah, is that while poskim are relatively ready to accept that there may be no prohibition against sharing information that's already public, they are more reluctant to permit actual gossip. The Rashbam, though talking about rechilot, which is in between, seems to support the general tendency as well. This may be due to their conviction that even if the damage is done, there's an ethical problem with bad-mouthing others. Alternatively, this is something that I want to make a point to you. Okay, guys, this is a very, Andrew. Okay, this is a very important insight that I think will help shape the information. Rav Daniel Feldman has a book on Lashon Hara that he wrote recently, and he makes, I think, a fascinating point. He argues that the reason Lashon Hara is aser is because it's always untrue. Now Gavi looks at me and says, what do you mean always untrue? It's true. But he says, well, how many of you have read Thinking Fast and Slow? Okay. Well, one of the things, right, that it points out is that, right, human beings function at two levels, right? System one, system two. Point is that there are things called heuristics, right, shorthands that we use intuitively to make life easier. And that's not rational, but it's the way we function. One of the things that emerges from that is something called the devil effect, or the halo effect. What's the devil effect or the halo effect?
Where we will either
people we like, we tend to view everything they do, even if it's questionable, in positive light. And people we don't like, we view everything in a negative light. Right? So Ray Feldman argues that once we know that about modern psychology, it could be that why is Lashon Hara aser? Not just because it's bad to badmouth people, but because the more you talk negatively about someone, the more, even if it's true, the more you bias the way they view them in the future, even when it's illegitimate. Right? So if someone is mostly good, but he's made one real mistake, right? So if I gossip about him to someone who's never met him, that will forever color the way they view this person, because the first thing they heard about him is negative. So now, from now on, and therefore, Feldman said it's very hard to ever say that something is really only going to have true effects. Now, based on that, it really makes a lot of sense why even repeating information that might be known could be problematic. Because even if you know the information, the more we talk about it, the more you feed into these heuristics, and the more it colors the way you view them in the future. So even something which is true and known, the more you talk about it, might have deleterious effects that are not fair. Another reason that poskim don't like jumping to the heter of Ba'apei Tlata is that, as we saw from Yereim, something might not be Lashon Hara, but it might be Onad Dvarim. Maybe it's not Lashon Hara, but if you badmouth people over and over, it still hurts them, and that may be also for other reasons. Based on all of that, plus the Rambam's qualification that we're only allowed to spread information but not spread it farther, right? All those together do make it the case that we don't jump on the heter of Ba'apei Tlata. But we have to remember that it does exist and it has implications lahalacha. And therefore, right, as I said, while poskim are relatively more lenient about sharing information that is already known, as long as the only issue at hand is privacy, they're more reluctant when it comes to gossip. In the age of social media, the reasons are obvious. Even if information is already spread, every new share on Facebook opens up a new circle of friends to the information, which is prohibited according to the Rambam. Even if it does not, sharing may hurt the subject to unimaginable ways each time a new person affirms knowing or caring enough to share the information. Even when things are universally known, the more something is put online, the harder it is to erase from the web, the more likely it is to appear in Google searches, etc. Thus, according to poskim such as Rav Shapiro and Rav Lior, the act of emphasizing this information may be problematic, even if we assume that it's almost always permissible to pass on universally known information. While earlier poskim raised these issues, the problems are incalculably more severe in our world of social media. Thus, care should be taken to not misuse this tool, which too easily becomes a weapon. Furthermore, as we've discussed, even in cases where there are technical dispensations available, the overriding principle of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha should enjoin us to be careful about how we treat the reputations of others. If you want to see all the implications that I drew from this, you can look at the articles. But now you understand, I think, why this is so important, right, to understand this category, because I really do think that the limit of Ba'apei Tlata, or the lack thereof, is so critical in a world of mass media and social media, v'chadomeh. But that's my summary of the sugya. Let's stop there and take a break. We have a guest share at 12. Okay? And if you're more interested in all the stuff I wrote about it, I sent it to you. You can see I hashed it out, and I went in painstaking detail, like how does this play out for Facebook? How does it play out in closed groups? How does it play out on listservs? How does it play out on Snapchat, where the assumption is that the text is deleted after a certain amount of seconds, right? How do you spell it out, and all these different information, the chulei. Remind them we have a